Hello, welcome back to the YouTube channel of Bethel Evangelical Free Church Hanley. I'm Pastor Gervais Charmley, and this is another video about a Shropshire church. This is the Church of St. Peter and St. Paul, Sheinton. Peter and Paul are often found joined together in church dedications. They are, of course, the two leading apostles. Peter, the apostle to the circumcision, to the Jewish people, and Paul, the apostle to the Gentiles. Of course, in practice, both of them went to the Jew first and then to the Greek. Certainly that's what we find in the book of Acts. The dedication reminds us of the Christian heritage that we have, and particularly a heritage of mission, a heritage of outreach. Now this is, say, in the Shropshire Hills, this is a church that dates back to the 12th century. We're very close to the Wrekin here, and this is an area where Richard Baxter, the famous Puritan theologian, or particularly famous Puritan pastor, because he's much better known for his pastoral work, for his book, The Reformed Pastor, and for his autobiography, than he is for his theology, which is largely regarded, and I think quite rightly, as having some, shall we say, quirks. But as a pastor, he was perhaps the greatest of the Puritans. Now, the church where he went as a boy doesn't exist anymore. It was replaced in the 19th century, but it would have been a building very similar to this, and this is just up the road. It's the kind of place where Baxter would have come to preach as a visiting preacher when he was ministering in Kidderminster, which isn't a huge distance from here, and of course, if this is his boyhood area, we're in the shadow of the Wrekin here. So, having given that brief and slightly rambling introduction, let's have a look at this Norman building. So here we are, we start at the west end. This is a tiny little building in some ways. It's quite tall, but the accommodation, there isn't a lot of it because this is a small parish. Now, the obvious clue to the church's Norman origins is here, the font. This is a good old-fashioned Norman tub, and as we've seen in previous videos in this series, the Norman tub is intended to be able to immerse infants certainly until the 17th, 18th century in England. The normal method of baptism is the total immersion of infants. So this is the font, and it's big enough to be able to get a fair-sized baby in there just in case you missed the child too soon after birth. The door is on the south side. This is the normal place to find a church door, and you can see it has a little postern in it, and that's what's generally used for access. We'll have a closer look at it later in this video. The Chancel Arch has been renewed. It's not Norman, there is a later aisle here. The box pews, and they are officially box pews because they have doors, are 19th century, but they do incorporate, particularly at the back, some earlier woodwork. You can just see it at the top there. This is some 17th century woodwork, and particularly here at this pew. The largest remaining piece of 17th century woodwork is the pulpit, which is a very fine example. There is, as usual, a war memorial. The pulpit is a very fine piece of 17th century work. As we said before, the 17th century is really when pulpits become a necessary part of church furniture. Before then, they are optional. So there we are, the pulpit nicely carved. You can just see there the ledge, the shelf around the edge for the book. It's been, of course, recited. There would have been a two-decker at some point. You have a low chancel screen. There's the very nice Victorian eagle lectern. Eagle lecterns are very popular. Now, there's a very interesting memorial here, and it's this one. This is quite clearly medieval, and it appears to be the memorial for a little girl, a child who Of course, infancy was very dangerous then, child mortality very high. But obviously this is a little girl from a good family who has been buried in the church. This is obviously not the original location of the memorial, but it's a very moving memorial to look at. You can see that her parents loved her very much, and when she died they laid her to rest here in the parish church. We have here Quo Vadis Sic Rumor, which is to do with a legend of St. Peter. When he was going to be executed, he ran away, and according to the story, on the road out of Rome he met the Lord Jesus walking into Rome, and he said, "Where are you going, Lord?" And the response was, "I'm going to be crucified again in your place." And so, of course, the apostle recognized that he was being a bit of a coward and went back to suffer the fate that the Lord had given him. Of course, whether the legend is true or not, well, that's the thing about legends, isn't it? We never quite know whether they are true or not. Here we are, more of that 17th century woodwork in the pews. And the forward pews have had their doors removed, but originally they all had doors, which was a good idea in this climate, because this is a lovely summer's day when I'm recording this, but I imagine in the winter it is very, very cold here. Choir stalls in the chancel. Again, this is the normal arrangement for the chancel. You have the reading desk there. The Bible on the lectern is the revised version of the RV, which was the 1880s revision, which famously, notoriously, depending on your point of view, it was when the Westcott and Hort text was used as the basis, rather than using the same text as underlie the authorized version. Windows, you see here that the window once went down a lot further but has been partially blocked up, and the same on this side. There's a nice little organ. The 19th century really is when organs become normal in country churches. Before the 19th century, what's popular is to have a little band that we made up of musically gifted, more or less, men of the parish, and it was generally men, and you'd have all kinds of instruments, depending, of course, on what the men could play. But they're replaced in the 19th century with organs, which allows for a single organist, and the idea is the organ is a more ecclesiastical instrument, the Queen of Instruments, as it's called. Here we have some memorials to do with clergy. In particular, here we have in memory of Elizabeth, wife of the Reverend Benjamin Bailey, rector at this parish, who died June the 19th, 1859, aged 72 years. To depart and to be with Christ is far better. The great memorial here is to the Reverend George Onions Bird, M.A., Christ Church, Oxford, rector of this parish and rural dean of Condover, by whose great exertions the church was restored. He died March the 31st, 1856, aged 64 years. So the current appearance of the church, particularly these pointed arches and the windows, have a lot to do with this man, George Onions Bird. You will notice, looking as we look west, we have this great structure at the back. That is supporting the bell cot. There is a little belfry up there, and it needs this wooden structure to support it. And you can see a very simple single aisle. At the back of the aisle there's the vestry. There's no tower. There's just a simple, originally a two-cell structure, now two-cell with an aisle. And then finally the third clergy memorial here we have is to the glory of God, in grateful and loving memory of Henry Lee, rector of Sheinton, 1878 to 1907, whose life of humble faith and prayer endeared him to all. This tablet was erected by parishioners and friends. We have a couple of 17th century chairs in the chancel, and you can see that the piscina there has been turned into a shelf. Windows with coloured glass. There's just this one says he, double checking. Just this one stained glass window, the east window, with the crucifixion central, flanked by "Unto us a child is born. It is finished. He is risen," are the texts. And it's again, it's a memorial to George Bird. It's a magnificent window. Obviously, High Church, and it depends what's your view on stained glass windows at all, or pictures of the Lord. But as a window, it's quite a good one. There is the church's banner, as it were, the church's emblem, St. Peter and St. Paul, Sheinton, and we've got the cockerel in the middle, which is a symbol of the Apostle Peter, and then the key again, a symbol of Peter, and the cross, or rather the sword, a symbol of the Apostle Paul, because the Apostle Paul, according to tradition, he was executed with the sword because he was a Roman citizen. He couldn't be crucified, and so they chopped his head off. This is one of those parishes where it looks as if the important house was the rectory. In fact, the old rectory is just behind the church here. It's a private house now, as so many of them are, because many of them are enormous. They're huge little manor houses, or sometimes big manor houses, that were intended for a gentleman to live in a gentleman's manor, so with servants and everything. And of course today that's just not what an Anglican clergyman is or can be. So there we are, St. Peter and St. Paul, Sheinton. We'll wander down west. There we are, the pulpit with its door. It's a very typical 17th century pulpit, and one can well imagine Richard Baxter or one of his friends preaching from it. There are, obviously there's a heating system, because my feet wouldn't go clang that otherwise. Now here we have the oldest memorial in the church. This is memorial to Thomas Cox, who died in January 1696, and his wife Catherine died in 1699. And then you have also below, looks like there's a family vault down there, because you've also got Elizabeth, wife of William Pritchard and daughter of Thomas Cox, who departed this life sept 1739, aged 74 years. Lo, here I rest in this soft bed of dust, waiting the resurrection of the just, in hopes to rise to life forever blessed with all the just in their eternal rest. Well, having had a good look at the inside of the church, let's now go outside. And before we do that, actually, there's a memorial here, there's a stone here recording the restorations of the building. So Richard Harnage, he would have been the church warden in 1669 when there was some work done, and then George Harnage, who's also going to be the church warden, so as quite often happen in these villages, offices like church warden would be hereditary. George Harnage, 1845, and below is the vestry door, and then this little door goes up, a little turret to access the bells. So there we are, and let's go outside and have a look around. Well, first of all, I said we'd look at the outer door, and this appears to be 17th century in date. You can see it's got this postern set into it, and that's what's generally used. So it's quite a small entrance. Now, we have this wonderful view because we're quite high up here. This is on the side of a hill overlooking this valley that heads down towards Much Wenlock. Much Wenlock is that way, and you can see the road that comes down. That's the road I came along. The churchyard is managed in such a way as to encourage wildflowers, and also because I wouldn't fancy mowing a slope like that, and I don't suppose any of the locals here would either. It's a long way down. You've got your usual assemblage collection of gravestones, largely 19th century, simply because that's... here we are. Here is there's the bell cot. You can see this little turret that is timber frame turret stuck on there, and because some of the timber or some of the plaster has come loose, you can see underneath it really is timber, and it's lath and plaster. And there's the little turret that leads up to it, and beyond that's the old rectory, now a private house. It's one of those buildings that, because it's on the side of a hill, to actually have a good look at it you've got to go down the bottom of the hill, which is what we will shortly do. Just have a stroll along the side here. See these table tombs. It's a very popular thing in the 18th century into the 19th to have these table tombs, and of course what's above ground is simply an empty box. The body will be some feet under, although I'm not sure it would actually be 6 feet. You see here the medieval masonry of the nave, and then the 19th century masonry of the chancel. It looks to me like the chancel is a 19th century addition. I do wonder, was there an original chancel? I suspect there was, and it was just regarded as not being good enough in the 19th century, and so it was replaced. So here we are. Yes, you've got there a peep at the old rectory. So let's just go down the bottom and take a look up at the building. So here we are at the Churchyard Gate, and there it is. There's the church notice board. Very important. And here is the church perched high upon the side of the hill here. You can see here we are down here. The church is right up there. And so it dominates the landscape. You can very much see from here the fact that is a Victorian chancel that's been put onto the medieval nave. Now it looks too short for me to think that it didn't originally have a chancel, so I suspect there was a smaller chancel that's been knocked down, so the new one can be put in its place. But it's a very fine example of these little village church that's been massively restored by the Victorians, because that's what the Victorians believed in, was massively restoring churches. And in many ways we're quite grateful for them, because if you hadn't had these restorations, the buildings would have fallen down and crumbled, and because many of them now are crumbling as there's less and less in the way of funds and people to support them. But there we are, St Peter and St Paul, Sheinton. I probably mispronounced the name, but I pronounce it Chainton, might be Sheinton. A little medieval church with some echoes, shall we say. You can say no more of that, echoes of Richard Baxter. Well, thank you for watching. I trust you find this interesting. I certainly enjoy going around these little places to have a look at them and to bring them to perhaps a wider world. Well, may God bless you and keep you. Amen.